Herzlich willkommen bei der Konferenz Achtsamkeit und Migration in einer sich ständig wandelnden Welt.
Welcome to the conference, Mindfulness and Migration in a Constantly Changing World.
Hello, Sarah.
How's it going?
It's going very, very well. We are now all looking forward for our discussion. You telling about yourself. I just want to share how we met each other for the very first time. So it was like 2 years ago with a friend. We were searching a flatmate, and with Sarah it was a little bit different because she started to talk about her experiences in several countries like Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, volunteering at schools, being with kids on the street, your experiences in Pakistan, Lebanon, in Syria, 2 years being in Nepal, being in refugee camps, and then deciding to go to live in a Tao-Tempel in Guatemala for more than 5 years and practicing everyday meditation for more than 6 hours or around. So it's an amazing journey you are going. I asked you today, how can I introduce you, your name? And you told me Sarah Van Yi. So I would ask you, what does Van Yi means and where does it come from?
Thank you for the introduction. Van Yi was the ordained name that I was given. I don't know Chinese, but my teacher told me, who speaks Chinese, told me that Feng refers to a winged being that flies in all places. So it's not limited to heaven, he said. It goes in the darkest places and everywhere without exception. So for me, I saw it a bit as like a bird and freedom. I go into the darkest places as much as everything else. And Yi, he said that it referred to beauty, to recognizing more of that. But you can call me Sarah.
I like the meaning of Van Yin. So my first question to you is, where did the journey start?
I guess the physical journey started when I left home. I was 16. And when I was 17, I went to East Africa for about a year. And that's the first time that I experienced an area of crisis of that type when the war started there in Kenya. And I saw how much need of help there was and how little support these situations had. So I got quite inspired and I decided to do a few courses, a few trainings to go to conflict areas. And yeah, I passed the next period of my life in these places and around these places. I was in various countries and situations of difficulty, and after some time I started seeing like that the same kind of patterns were there in each country I went to. And I started seeing also like that in the history of time, those patterns were playing out as well. And so I started wondering if it will ever change, and if it will change, how can it change? Because after some time I felt like we were using all of our energies and all of our resources to try to kind of like patch up a cloth that was breaking at all sides. And also the more we sewed, sometimes the more we broke around it. And I started, I suppose, wondering about the causes of things, since it seemed like we were treating the symptoms or the consequences a lot. I also started seeing these same patterns in myself of conflict and of division, and started seeing that in a way the situation of the world was a reflection of the collective human condition, and that I took part in that as well. And that until I understood how I took part in that and what is the source of the problem, let's say, my actions would be as limited as I was, or at least as I believed myself to be. And so my journey slowly brought me east, bit by bit, over a couple of years. And I moved by land, so it was very like life was bringing me in a way. And slowly I arrived to Nepal. At that point, I felt like I looked outside, and every place that made the most sense to me, or that gave me the most important sense of purpose. And yet I hadn't found an answer, I suppose. And I started kind of suspecting that it was within me all along, and that's the only place I needed to look. So I stopped, and I found an abandoned house just underneath the Himalaya on a big lake. I got in touch with the owners and I moved in. I stayed there for maybe a year and a half. I lived a simple life. I meditated a lot. I had the luck of finding out that there was a Buddhist meditation center not far from there. So I would help out there a lot and do retreats and sit a lot at home. I would walk down to fetch the water for the day and wood for cooking. And I had 2 small goats that they played hide and seek. And we had a big, peaceful buffalo also in the garden. I lived alone, but I had 5 small houses, the neighbors, which were very lovely. And I rested long hours just in the breath and in the space under the words, and sometimes lost in thought. There were periods where I felt like the meaning of life was living, and really that was enough. I didn't wonder what to do in those months. It was almost like life knew what to do, and it did it through me, or through itself, through me. Something inside was still calling. And also I noticed that when I would encounter people, that kind of presence and stillness would fluctuate, and there would be a return more to what they call the monkey mind. And so my journey continued, and I eventually ended up living, as you mentioned, for 6 years in a Tao-Tempel doing monastic training. I was ordained a monk, and we trained maybe 7 hours per day. And at one point, 2 masters of this tradition advised me to leave, and they told me to go into the world, and that I had done enough of the monastic training in the temple, and that it was time to bring these tools that we were cultivating in the monastic training, to carry them into the world and define and learn how to keep center and keep stillness and keep presence also when in the difficulties and things of life, let's say, which I had missed out on due to the fact that I left so young. I hadn't experienced many things that were quite normal for other people. So I benefited a lot from this. At the moment, I'm sharing and retreats and a lot of sitting. And also I ended up going back to the refugee camps in the north of Lebanon on the border with Syria as well for some months, last year, 5 months, and year before a couple of months. At the moment, I am looking to buy a land to make a retreat place in Greece, make a space where we can do more intensive practice together. And also it would be nice to organize some retreats that are more specialized for people that work in areas of crisis, because the problem of burnout is massive in these places, and it happens to all of us. It would be nice if we could do this work in a more sustainable way for everybody.
Thank you, Sarah, for giving a fast overview about your faith. Your decision to go to Africa, where did the motivation come from?
I wanted to help, I guess, also perhaps looking for a sense of purpose as a human. And the one that seemed most meaningful was to be at service. Of course, then once there, I saw all my limitations in trying to do that, and in my understanding of what it means to be at service.
I was also in East Africa 3 years ago, and if you haven't been there, so the experience you make there, it's not easy to imagine how is life or to see street kids. So maybe you hear about, but to be there is something completely different. So do you remember yourself the experiences or the feeling you had going there, or seeing poverty or people in need, people who suffer, or maybe refugees?
Yeah, it changed a lot over time. Yeah, I saw great suffering and a lot of bad things. Also, we lived in a slum for more than 6 months there outside of Nairobi. And the situation in the slum felt worse than in the refugee camps that I saw later on. It was a difficult environment to live in. Yeah, over time, I guess I found that the only way to carry such weight and the knowing of all of the suffering in our bodies so personally, the only way was through softness. It was not through trying hard to be able to carry in a hard way, maybe through letting our heart break open instead of closed. So letting it actually touch us and feel and not close off to the feeling.
When you were staying in Africa, you were around 20 years old, right?
I was 17, 18. And then I went to the Middle East. Then it was 5 years before I went back again, but I went very briefly. And then it was another 5 years before I went back again.
Then let's go to the East. What happened there?
In the East, that's when the questions started coming up that I mentioned. My inability to truly help, I guess, became more relevant and more apparent. There's a feeling I had in this time of meditating and being in the state for longer periods was that I felt that perhaps if I or somebody could carry fully this presence into action, then that would bear the most powerful fruit of all. I saw that every action I took carried the seeds of my inner conflicts and confusions. And so when there was, or what felt like a total presence and absence of Sarah, therefore, I was totally there. In those moments, there was so much space, and I felt like a very creative and unique response could come about from there.
And then you went to Guatemala and to stay in a temple, and you were there for over 5 years. So how can I imagine this moment to take decision? It's a life decision somehow, as a very young person, to say, now I go to live in a temple and I will stay there maybe for the rest of my life.
It happened quite naturally. It was consequences of causes, a whole set of them that brought me there, and nothing else made sense than the inside work at that point. Yeah, that was the only thing that makes sense, was to dedicate completely to that. And in the circumstances that I found myself in that moment, it meant to be a monk, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that.
How was it then for you to be in the temple? How were your first feelings, your first experiences?
There was a lot of time that I was there, and it changed a lot over time. In the beginning, it was quite exciting in a way to be able to do all those hours of practice and have other people that were doing the practice with me and guidance. Over time, a lot of sensitivity developed, and I became so sensitive to everything around me, even when I went outside in the village, which was a quiet village, but for me felt like a busy city. And all the different sides of the roads were felt, and of the people passing by, and I hadn't quite developed a capacity to manage with that sensitivity. Living in this clean environment where everybody was doing a practice so intensively had made me very sensitive and aware, but I hadn't learned how to manage that. So that's why also it was so important to go out and use Google Maps and have an apartment with friends and go to work and go to a party, all of these things. And just carry the practice into every aspect of life. Because if it's a practice that works, then it should be able to make us more and more able to be in life.
Would you like to share which practice do you mean? What have you learned at the temple? So for over 5 years, practicing every day, more than 6 hours. So what kind of practice is this that you are using nowadays?
Yeah, it keeps on changing, developing. It's always a discovery. It feels like it's going to be endless. We did about half of the time of sitting and half of the time of moving. That was Tai Chi and Qigong. It would be known like that. We could do a small sitting together here now, if you want. That's the best way of explaining it. First, I'll give a bit of base context and cover some basics. Yeah, because the first step is we want to learn how to listen and feel inside of ourselves. Now, for that, there is a method. And then the second step is, check what is our mind doing with what is felt and what is encountered when we listen inside. You will see that the mind, when it finds something, whether in the body sensation or in the activity of the mind, it will generally judge it as either pleasant or unpleasant. And if it judges it as pleasant, then the mind will say, how do I keep this? How do I hold on to this? And if it judges it as unpleasant, then it will say, how do I get rid of this or get away from this? In both cases, we are moving away from being in touch with what's there. In both cases, it's a resistance to what is. It's a reaction that brings us away from the present moment. We all know that trying to get away from something that we don't like doesn't make it go away. In the sitting, maybe we can try and do something different. And instead of moving away or holding, we just be with what's there and just let it be exactly as it is for 10 minutes. So we can rest our eyes, close the eyes, if that's most comfortable. And we want to look for a position that is comfortable enough, aligned enough. So we can sit cross-legged with a pillow or on the chair is also fine. Just don't lean on the back of the chair. You want to keep straight. You can put the heels under your knees if you're on the chair. Feet parallel. And we just listen inside to how the body is feeling. We notice the breath. And as we can, we want to let the mind rest in the breath. And in particular, we find the breath in the lower stomach area and allow the mind to rest in the lower stomach area, in the feeling of the breath in that area. And we want to allow a wave of release down from the top of the head into the feet. So we can start from the top of the head and feel sensation there. And just let things release a bit, let go a bit down, coming down to the face, facial expression, the jaw, the ears, the head, the neck, the throat. Not labeling what we meet. We want to let it be exactly as it is. And also we want to make sure that in the not labeling of things, we don't distance ourselves from what is met. So we want to move really closely to any sensation in the body. So closely that in a way we become it. So we become the shoulders, allowing the shoulders to release. Down to the fingertips. Just feeling into what's there. And letting the chest and upper back also release and be felt. So when I say release, I don't mean collapse. I don't mean a kind of relaxation that is collapsed. It's more a kind of relaxation that is fully engaged, fully present, down through the torso. Coming into the lower stomach and lower back and hips. You want to make sure that the mind is not becoming too rigid or narrow or forceful. You want to let it just rest and absorb and move closer. And you keep on noticing the breath to the bottom of the body, from the hips, perineum, pelvis, groin area. And continuing to rest and absorb the mind into the legs. Just coming in touch with what's there. That's it. Don't try to fabricate something in particular. We're only concerned with the raw experience of what's happening in the legs. And continuing into the feet. Letting the feet be. All suffering I've encountered in myself so far always involved resistance to what was arising, like a separation from what was arising. So in practice, we want to learn how to move closer, allow, and connect. That is the all-healing agent, bringing things together, including and accepting. And you want to carry that kind of attention throughout the body, from the feet to the head, to the fingertips. Letting the breath be felt. From the top of the head to the bottom of the feet, and from the bottom of the feet to the top of the head. We want to make sure that our attention doesn't become lazy or sloppy or dispersed. We want it to be open and available and relaxed, inclusive, adaptable, but also too much of that can become dispersed. And at the same time, we want it to be focused and attentive and present and unwavering. And too much of that can become narrow and rigid and tight. So we find that middle way, like a tender presence. And continue to cultivate this quality of tender presence also during the day as much as we can. The world needs it. So if we can sit even just 10 minutes every day and almost like build this kind of muscle, then when the difficulties of life come about even more intensely, we have a foundation that we've developed in the practice, and it becomes easier then to face things when they come up in daily life, especially in the work.
Thank you, Sarah, for this guided session. So you are sharing this practice. This was a little taste of it how you guide people, how you speak, with wording you are using. Also, people invite you for retreats. You are going to Ireland this summer and France. You will be in Greece. That's my last question. What is your purpose right now? And in the future, you mentioned you want to buy land in Greece.
I don't know exactly the next step. I have plans, but also the project in Greece, I would like to let it develop naturally. I'm still in the beginning of the practice. I don't consider myself a teacher. I'm just sharing. And I try to be as honest as I can as to where I'm at. My main teacher is very encouraging of me sharing the practice. And so I've been sharing it and people have been benefiting from it. So I naturally continued from there and we started doing retreats just by mistake almost. I would like to continue to dig deeper and to do it together. And I'd hope that our next step would bring us all together. And we'll see what that means.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing. I see some hands.
Hello, Sarah. So you mentioned that you went to different conflict areas and that you saw different patterns repeating in different countries, and also these patterns inside of yourself. So maybe you can speak a bit about these patterns and what they are.
Yes, so the base pattern was one of divisiveness and a resistance to what is at the base. Within me, I was in conflict because I was always running away or pushing away something, whether an idea or a sensation or an emotion, an imagination, a thought or whatever, or I was attaching and clinging and holding on. So conflict started from there in me. And then it manifested in all of these different ways that will look different for all the different people. But at the base, I found the exact same pattern of, holding on and clinging and pushing away and rejecting and resisting. So until I found peace within me, I would be contributing to that. It's also, I had conflict about conflict. By having conflict about the conflict and about the wars and about the situation of the world, I was contributing and perpetuating the conflict in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marius writes, does that mean that the conflicts in these areas cannot be resolved?
I would say not with the current state we're in, not with this condition. But I would say there is hope. Perhaps we can find a new, completely unique and creative response to the problems in the world. But that cannot be found if we are completely occupied with our own self-concern and with the patterns of pushing away and holding on.
It continues the question of Marius. You were talking about the inner conflicts, and our self, and that we are so occupied with the self inside, and this disconnects us to other people. And when we go to a conflict area with this self, then it could not be very useful for the others, as I've understood. There just come up the question, if we really work on it to solve our inner conflicts more and more and more and more, so over years, how do you see it? Could we then create more possibilities to resolve also outer conflicts?
Yeah, from my experience so far, I would say yes. I would say that if enough of us change, especially people that have influence on many other people, and took the time to heal and to actually work on ourselves and to actually take responsibility for our contribution to the world, starting with the simplest things, like with the way we wake up in the morning and with what we do when we meet the next person, what we do before sleeping, how we sleep, and setting reminders around the house for ourselves about things that we would like to work on and qualities we would like to carry forth during the day, and take care of our health, do that workshop, write things down, share them with others. It really doesn't take much to do the first step, and from there all the other steps come, and help each other out. We have an effect on each other, and we should remember that more, like we're here together.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi Sarah. I saw in the program that the thing you're talking about is mindfulness, resilience, and crisis area. And I heard a lot of the mindfulness part in what you were saying. And I was asking myself, how does resilience come up by mindfulness? Could you maybe explain the link of the two closer?
Usually when working in conflict areas, we meet a lot of very difficult things. And it is quite a heartbreaking work in a way. Usually when we meet these difficult things, I generally get a feeling in the chest of pain. We usually react to it, well, in two main ways. Yeah, so either we get overwhelmed by what we see. And I was saying that it's not even really what we see that overwhelms us. Like it's what we tell ourselves about what we see. It's the story that overwhelms us, our reaction to the story. Because inequities can be seen just as inequities. That doesn't mean that we feel less. In fact, when we really see things as they are, we're very intimate with what we see. We're very close to it and we feel it very directly. So it's not that we care less by seeing it with acceptance and by seeing inequities as inequities. The other option that I saw myself and other volunteers react to the difficulties that we meet in this work is that we close down and we harden. So we close our heart, we numb, we try to not feel, push away the feeling and harden our hearts. Either way, between both of them, we just in a way add suffering to the suffering. It doesn't help anybody, actually. And also over time, it builds up, and that's when burnout comes about ourselves. Even if when we close up, we don't feel it, but it's still there. So the way I have found to manage this is that when I feel the hurt, I gently stay with it, but almost like a peaceful warrior though, a soft one. And I soft around the feeling and I warm around the feeling, but I don't turn away. So head up, eyes open, shoulders relaxed, chest open, breathe, and not run away from anything. Don't make any bit of it unconscious. But it's very important that we do this not in a forceful way, because in the moment we do it fully, the quality, even if we're only able to do it 2%, 10%, whatever percentage, do that percentage fully and stay with it and let it gently break your heart open, not closed, like we were saying. That is the only way that I have found so far to be able to carry the word of the word compassion. And I heard that it is translated, so to suffer with, not away.
Thank you for the answer. Maybe I have a question which goes along with that. When we speak about compassion, or when we encounter suffering or situations that are heartbreaking, or if people are hurted and we have compassion with them. So I feel it like there is one way to have compassion, but because there was yesterday, we had a contribution about the Ukraine, and then there was the sentence like compassion for the aggressor. So this is another thing. And probably the political discussion from the last century, Gandhi wouldn't have to win the war against Hitler. And so it's about the non-violent, the principles of non-violence and compassion and how you deal with aggressive situations. Do you feel still compassion? How do you deal with this situation? How would you recommend to deal with such situations, even personal, in private situations on the street or wherever? And then in the big thinking, in conflict areas, how can we have compassion with aggression?
There are a few questions there. When we want to make ourselves into a being that can respond to whatever is most needed in that moment. And that could look like many things in my experience. It doesn't look a certain way. So that would vary a lot. But that kind of response, from what I've seen so far, only comes up from a space of presence, not from ideas. And for that, daily practice helps a lot. It's essential. In the big sphere, enough of us would have to change and take responsibility for our part and change the way we live, even just a bit, how we spend our money or pass our time, how we influence people in our jobs. Also taking the leap of making a change in our lives that will be more of benefit to others. And also having compassion for somebody that is doing something that we don't judge as something good or helpful. It doesn't mean that we allow them to continue doing what they're doing or that we have to be with them. Having compassion often can involve stopping a situation and taking action. It's like we think that acceptance is this passive force when it's not. It's a very, very active, powerful power. Acceptance is like a fully engaged kind of movement in my experience. It's not passive at all. It's just that the result of an action that moves from a total acceptance will be completely new, I would say. So it's hard to just give an answer exactly to your question.
Completely fine. Thank you for giving an answer anyway.
Thank you for this question, Jakob, because for me it's a very essential question, because I'm really working on, especially on this question, probably about 7 years. I all the time was asking myself, what does compassion mean with the aggressors? And I found out some exercises how to practice compassion for aggressors. So it was in a form of sitting meditation. With the time, there came up some situations where was a very aggressive surrounding around myself. And I just can share my experience, what happened in these situations. It was always the same. Yeah, and I really don't know why. But in these situations, when it was possible to stay completely in presence, then the aggression stopped immediately. And I never looked for this situation. I just came into some situations. I cannot recommend it. Really, I cannot, because I don't know what's needed that this can happen. I just saw that this is possible, but I don't know anything about it. And so for me, it's just a question in which circumstances this can happen in that way, and in which circumstances this can get in a completely other way, that maybe the aggression can also get against myself.
Thank you for sharing.
Do you also have similar experiences, or could you add something? What's really necessary to know about it, or which abilities are needed that this could be, and in a good way?
Yeah, we affect each other. I did have experiences like this at various times. We affect each other. Whatever we carry will affect the surrounding, and we feel each other. We all know that. So if you are carrying loving kindness for the other, it will melt something in them generally, and they will feel it, maybe to a small degree, maybe to a big degree, and it will change generally the course of action in my experience. If the loving kindness is not from the mind and it's truly felt, that's the first thing that popped up in my mind about it.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sarah, I'm deeply impressed about your wisdom. And for me, you are a wonderful teacher. Thank you.